All right. What didn't DA answer for you?
How would you describe where things are with Alvin right now?
Yeah, look, he's here. I haven't had a conversation with him today, but he's here. I appreciate that he's here. And look, I think one thing that you have to understand, or we have to understand, is that I'm going to be conservative here. I'd say 50% of our organization, players, coaches, administrators, scouts, feel like they're underpaid, right? And believe they deserve and want more money. And how each of us respond to that and act accordingly. Listen, that's a personal issue, and so I appreciate that he's here. I think those are questions that you have to ask him how he's feeling, but I appreciate that he's here and he's in great shape, like he always is, and looking for a good season. But more importantly, I think for him is he wants to win. So, just like the rest of us.
You had some doubts that he might not be here?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd put any expectation on it. I just see what happens.
Is it fair to say his situation is a little more nuanced than more money? Isn't it about more?
I don't know. You have to ask him those questions about nuance.
Yeah, Mickey, he essentially had 1 year left on his deal. I know next year some things kick in,
Mm-hmm.
but were you guys content to just play it out? He's the one who was.
Yeah, look, I don't want to get into those kind of conversations, and it's nothing new. It's nothing about him. It's just you guys know how I am about negotiations. I don't like doing that publicly. I don't like, I'm not one that wants to put things out or try to influence any negotiation through the media. I think if I have something to say, I say it directly to the agents and the players.
We've also talked a lot this offseason about how you have to reset the salary cap a little bit in this team. Has that affected some of the contract decisions with veteran players on this team, deciding whether to extend, things like that?
Look, where we're at on the salary cap every year influences, how and what we're able to do. I don't think that's much different than it's been in the past. Obviously there's some volatility in the market for different positions, and we have to pay attention to that.
Have there been any contract talks with Alvin's representation since minicamp?
Yeah, I'd rather not get into that, Captain. So,
Mickey, do you think his production the last couple of years has warranted his decision to leave minicamp, and then to this point where we are now, talking about him wanting
those are questions you have to ask him. I think in terms of how he's affected by that. Look, I would say our performance as a team hasn't been up to the standard that we set for ourselves. So these things are not, look, there is individual performance, but our concern is team performance, right? That's how do we make our team better? How do we get more wins? How do we get in a more advantageous position entering the playoffs? First, you got to make the playoffs. And so that's the context that all these decisions are made in, much more so than individual performance, although individual performance is important.
Mickey, you talked about the culture at the end of the season. Just this time of year, and I guess maybe all throughout the offseason, what are some of the things you guys are implementing or looking at, or maybe focusing on more to get that to where exactly you want it to reach?
Yeah, I think mainly it's been a discussion, and it's been a discussion coached in terms of the coaches, in terms of the players, in terms of our organization and how we are approaching it, how we, what our expectations are, and making sure that we're communicating those expectations to all parties correctly and emphatically. And so, I think one of the things is we've got a lot of younger players. I feel like, I don't know if the data supports it, but I feel like we've got a lot of young players in our core group, and so making sure that we're putting them in the best position to not just be successful as players, but in terms of growing as leaders and setting the culture, because the culture and the leadership best comes from the players. And so we just want to make sure that we're giving them every opportunity to be their best, version of that for themselves.
Eric McCoy said, you guys had talked to him about, maybe being more vocal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that part of it, just going around and kind of tapping into different guys?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a combination of ability, want to, and status in terms of where you're at in your career on the team. And so, Eric's a good example of someone that's got all the qualities that you're looking for in a team leader, and we just want to make sure that we're giving him the opportunity to be that. And there are other guys as well.
What can you explain about the league rule? I mean, did you spend the last couple months trying to figure out what you're allowed to do with opening practices to fans, and you got a final answer recently or something? What was the...
I don't think so. Look, I think for us here, we're away from our home market. We're not expecting, we weren't expecting a lot of fans. It just, the venue, all the logistics that are involved, because it's significantly more logistics involved when you open it up to the public as to when you don't. So all those factors came into play. I didn't really, do much inquiry about what we were allowed to do with fans or not allowed to do, because pretty quickly we determined that, hey, it's going to be a limited amount of people at practice.
Nick, would you say it's your intention at this point to be here for 1 year and be
Yeah.
back in Metairie next year? Is that the plan as it stands right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're here because of the variables that existed, with the remodel of the facility. And look, there's some other factors. The heat last year, I felt like that was the first year that, man, it just really impacted what we were able to do in terms of training camp. This year, who knows what the heat's going to be over the next 30 days. It's going to be hot, we know that. But there's also been a lot more, rainfall, and so that, along with the limited space we have in the indoor facility, because the remodel has taken away some of our space inside there, it just makes it a lot more. It just affirms the decision to come out here and have training camp away. In terms of the future, our intention is to be back in Metairie. So,
In terms of the logistics you're talking about opening fans, does that come down to a cost issue of how much it would cost for security versus?
it's a variable. I wouldn't say that's the main decision point, but it's certainly part of the equation.
Did you also experience the Greenbrier playing to that at all? Because from what I recall, those were open, but
Yeah, they were open.
That many fans there. So did you all take experience from
No,
that?
I
Too long ago.
No, because I didn't really consider. I thought we had a good turnout at the Greenbrier a number of times, especially initially.
Speaking, though,
Yeah, initially we had a good turnout, and that's always the way it happens at training camp. Is that first week or so, you get a heavy turnout, and then it dwindles. That happens in New Orleans as well. And then when you practice against somebody, obviously, that draws a big crowd regardless of where you're at. So, the answer to your question is I didn't really think about the Greenbrier in that experience. It was more about, here, the short time to get all these logistics worked out for ourselves, and that was it.
Mickey, Dennis Allen mentioned making it clear every once in a while that everything's not going to be the same as it's been. I know when you hired him at first, you liked the idea of continuity.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't need a culture change at that time. Was there some desire to mix things up more than you did when you initially?
I think that look, you go through a few seasons where you don't make the playoffs, and there's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable. We should be uncomfortable with that, and so that's part of it. But yes, the answer is, if you're not as successful and you don't meet your expectations, and we want to do something a little different.
Nick, you're looking forward to seeing how the O-line plays out once you can put the pads on and
Yeah.
get physical a little bit?
Yeah.
Concerned about what you had, that youth that you had there somewhat?
Yeah, I think you're always concerned when you have when you don't have the proven commodity. We had a lot of years where the offensive line, we just knew going into the season we're going to be, one of the top groups in the NFL. That was pretty comfortable, and with Teron a couple years ago leaving, and now Ryan unable to play, that's not as comfortable. So, yeah, I'm anxious to see how this group. I'm excited about the group. I think that I feel good about where we're at, and yet it's unproven.
I know you you don't really want to have to watch the wires to see what players pop up out there. But do you feel
Yeah.
like with this group, because there's so much unknown for the Pats going to see what they could do then, that you may have to watch what's available out there even more?
Well, I think we always do that anyway. I would say this, though. I do feel pretty comfortable with, the guys that you would say today are the backups. I think we've got some veterans that have played a lot of football in our league, and we've got some guys that we've had here that have progressed and we feel good about. So I'm less concerned about, obviously, if somebody comes available that we don't expect that can improve us, we're gonna do that. But it's not like a target at this point.
Maybe now that you've had several months to work with him on staff, what's kind of been your impression of Clint Kubiak and the way he kind of runs the shop?
Yeah, he's very impressive. He's super smart, innovative. I think he has a real confident demeanor about him. He's quiet, but he has a confident demeanor, knows what he's trying to get accomplished, and yet I think he's also there's an open-mindedness to him that if something, if he has a round hole in a square peg, he's going to figure out a way to make that work. And so I've been impressed. I've been impressed with the number of the new guys that we have.
The quiet demeanor really comes across to us too.
Yeah.
I've been kind of say the confidence, maybe the players kind of see that. You don't really necessarily need a coach who's super I guess classically charismatic.
Well, I get what you're asking. I think sometimes when you're quiet, people question whether you have that burning competitiveness, whether you are confident. But I think if you're around Clint for any period of time at all, you see both that competitive fire and you see the confidence. And so I appreciate that. I don't know that I answered any question there, but
did that kind of stand out in his interview, or is that something you've just noticed being around him now the last couple of months?
Yeah, I think it's something you may think out of an interview, but I think it's something that you get over time. If you're quiet, and look, I consider myself in that category. It's hard to get to know somebody in an interview that's relatively quiet and not gregarious, right? It takes a little time to appreciate some of the qualities that you may not see right off the bat.
Mickey, I'm going to include all the obvious qualifiers. You don't care what analysts outside the building think. You do care what fans think, but this team is pretty widely dismissed a lot.
Yeah.
There was a publication today that had you ranked as the 31st brightest future in the NFL. What do you think people are missing about why they should be optimistic about the
I don't
direction
care.
Well, what do you like about the direction?
Here's the deal. I don't care about what these other media people, because most of them are unqualified.
Sure.
They have the right to their opinion, but they're not qualified to be critical or I don't ask them for advice. So why would I pay attention to a critique from them? So.
Well, how about just from a fan base perspective? If they're getting apathetic after 3 years missing the playoffs, what's the most energizing factor about this team?
Yeah,
right
look,
now?
I think that we have a chip on our shoulder, and that's energizing. And I think we have talent. And I think we have a lot of young players that. I think we have a combination of young players that are trying to make their mark and prove themselves, and I think we have a group of older players, veteran players that are unsatisfied with the results the last few years. So I think that's a good combination.
For the veterans, is that kind of gives you confidence that they won't decline physically, or that they're still in a good shape to?
Yeah, well, I think, look, that's part of what the process is for training camp, right? To see where, see where your veteran players are. It's like, Sean would say, and a lot of coaches have said, look, I don't need to see it every day, but I do need to see it. And so that's part of where we're at. In terms of the veterans.
With Shahid's extension, can you just go into, what's the benefit from a team perspective doing that now versus letting it get?
Yeah, I think he was in a little bit of an unusual situation that he was an exclusive rights player that didn't have a contract. So, oftentimes, look, he wants to get paid based upon what he thinks he's going to be, and we want to pay him on based upon what he's been and where we think he's going to be, and sometimes that's hard to marry. And so oftentimes you get in a position where maybe there's a bridge deal that gets it rewards the player for what he's done, and yet gives him time to achieve what we think he can achieve, and then get another deal. And so that's really what this deal is.
You kind of referenced a number of times the youth on this team and opportunities for a lot of younger guys. Is it more this year than it has been?
It feels like it. Again, I see these things about average age of your team and who's young and who's not, but I don't think that really tells the whole story. I think oftentimes it's, hey, what's the core of your team, and are they first, second, third year players versus 6, 7, 8, 9 year players? Quarterback being an exception to that, oftentimes because of the length of their careers, much longer than most other positions. So I feel like, look, we've got a lot of core players that are ascending. Some players that are improving, and yet we feel good about. So it feels like our team is younger than it's been in prior years.
From like a cap management standpoint, like is that where you kind of want to be, where you're in a position where you can see what these guys can do, and then if their starters are on rookie deals?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword because you want to draft well, right, and you want guys that you've drafted to get to the top of their position group, and then you have trouble signing them all.
Yeah.
Look, I've seen a number of publications that have graded our 2017 draft, really high, and I agree with that. It was a really good class, and yet we were unable to keep all of those players because of the salary cap, because of where we're at. You can't pay everyone. And so you got to make choices, and so it's a double-edged sword in that regard. You want all your draft picks to do really well, but in terms of the cap, at some point you got to pay them all what their market value says, and that becomes more difficult.
How do you kind of feel about that in relation to Paulson and Debo? I know you're not going to say directly, but just he's a guy who could be extension candidate.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I'm going to say about that.
And Chase Young's obviously still a young player. We might not talk to you for a while after you see him on the field, but everything leading up to this point, has it gone as well as you were hoping?
It's been very positive, and I've been impressed with how hard he's worked to get his rehab done, how his attitude about being on this team and having a chip on his shoulder. I feel like, look, he's a player that feels like he has something to prove, and oftentimes when you're that high a draft pick, that's hard to recapture, and I feel like that's where he's at. And look, again, we're just starting training camp, so we'll get to evaluate. We'll get to evaluate him as a player and where he's at, and we're going to be cautious about. We're not going to rush him out there. We're going to be cautious about how we practice him and get him to the point where he's playing, but we've got a lot of time to do that.
Make you feel good about your tight end room?
I feel good when Jawan gets healthy, and then I think we've got a really strong deep group. But I think that's part of the equation. Yeah.
Could you just walk us through
Last one.
Just how you feel about Ryan Ramczyk, not knowing he's not going to be available, and maybe?
Yeah, that's a rough one, because my number one, look, Ryan Ramczyk's been a fabulous player for us, fabulous, and a great teammate. I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about is how often he went out there without being 100%, and just giving everything he's got. I know how badly he wants to play, and if there was any way possible, he would be playing. I just appreciate how much he's contributed to our team, and hopeful that things can turn around, and with the year off that his knee responds and he can get back out here for us. I don't know what else to say about it.
What can you share on Jawan Johnson's projection timetable?
Yeah, I don't really have a timetable for, it's going to be hopefully before the first game, certainly, but we'll see where he's at in terms of when he can get out here and practice full, That remains to be seen. Okay?
Thanks, man.
Good. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the weather. You also should be thanking me.